Hello, this is Brian. Today is Monday, September 22nd, 2025, and I'm here at Mount Helix Park in the Casa-De-Oro Mount Helix area, right next to the city of Mesa. And it's time for a Spotlight on Shrubs video today. Today I want to focus on a Southern California classic shrub, and that is Cleveland sage, Salvia clevelandii. Cleveland sage is a small to medium-sized shrub, and it's in the mint family, the Lamiaceae. So it's related to mints, the peppermints. It's related to even stuff like rosemary, thyme. And it is a native here of Southern California, especially the southwestern portion of Southern California. Cleveland sage is mostly native here in San Diego County, mostly in inland chaparral from a few hundred feet above sea level to sometimes above 4,000 feet. And it's mostly found in interior inland chaparral and coastal sage scrub. It is a common fixture on the gabbro soil that is commonly found in our foothills and mountains in the interior. A lot of these mountains here in the back country have populations of Cleveland sage, including San Miguel Mountain, Otay Mountain, the Hamul Mountains, probably up on Lions Peak, over by McGinty Mountain, probably on Sycuan Peak over there, and definitely on Viejas Mountain over there, have populations of this shrub. A lot of these mountains that I've mentioned have gabbro soils, and Cleveland sage tends to grow more prolifically on those type of soils. So I'm going to shoot a general picture or two, then I'm going to start going into some of the details about this plant. So another thing about Cleveland sage is that, as previously briefly mentioned, that this is a mostly San Diego County species, but it is also found in parts of western Riverside County and maybe occasionally in parts of Orange County, maybe southern Orange County it may be possibly found, and probably down into Baja California as well. But San Diego County, anywhere from west of the higher mountains to the near coastal foothills, is where you'd be most likely to find this shrub, again in gabbro metavolcanic soils. So one thing you'll notice about the Cleveland sage is this is a very fragrant shrub. It is one of the most fragrant shrubs we have here in Southern California, and one cool thing about it is that the smell has an overwhelming sweetness to it, a perfume to it. It does have some of that basic sage spiciness, but it is overpowered by the perfumed aroma that emanates from this plant. So you'll know you're by Cleveland sage when you smell a very heavy perfumey aroma. It's a little more perfumed than in most sages here in Southern California. So a lot of times you'll know it's near well before you even see it. So what about the physical details of Cleveland sage? Well, see, what we have here are these grayish green leaves that are slightly warty in texture, So if you rub them, they're soft and rough at the same time. It's kind of hard to put this into words. So they kind of have a velvety texture, actually. If you really want to describe it, the leaves have a soft, slightly warty but velvety texture, and you just barely brush it with your skin, and the aroma is insane. It's one of the most prolifically fragrant shrubs around. So again, these grayish green leaves, roughly narrow, kind of tapering off to, I would say, a very short leaf stalk. You can see here, this grayish green serves a purpose. Now the leaves kind of have a little bit of a pubescence, and that what gives it the velvety texture. So what happens is the grayish green is a result of having fine hairs or trichomes on the leaves, and what the trichomes do is help reflect the excessive sun, because it lives in areas where anywhere from 50 to 75% of the year is dry. So the hairs on the leaves give it the grayish color, which partially shade the leaves. The hairs partially shade the leaves and give it a color to reflect the sun, so there's less desiccation. Now eventually these shrubs do often have a bit of a dormancy period during the driest parts of the year. This area where I'm showing this video is actually fairly well irrigated here, so that's why we have some of the other features I will be detailing fairly soon. But as you can see here, they're pretty well leafed out. Sometimes they will go partially dormant and look really wrinkly and dehydrated. If you go some of these hills and mountains here, they'll probably look very dry and dusty and very dehydrated, and that's common. That's natural for them during the dry season. So these ones are pretty lush because they get irrigation here. So you'll notice another thing about the leaves, there's some slight serration on the edge of them. It's hard to tell. You have to really look closely at them. But they have slightly toothed edges, and again a slightly bumpy, warty texture underneath the soft, velvety fuzz. And you'll notice the upper leaves are smaller. They're smaller because the higher leaves get more exposure to the sun and therefore need less space to photosynthesize, while the lower leaves tend to be a bit larger, sometimes a little wider, because they need to be wider to catch more light. And also it's less desiccating down here because you don't have the sun's full blast on the leaves. So let me go get a few leaf detail pictures, and then I'll go start talking about other aspects of this plant. Alright, so obviously these shrubs are a lot more than just leaves. Those got branches, and since this is a flowering plant, flowers. So these upper twigs are a lot more brittle than the woodier bases. Now these are not strongly woody plants. Most of our sages that form shrubs are not super strongly woody. They tend to be a little more brittle than a lot of our tougher chaparral shrubs, like the sumacs, the toyon, chamise. But you'll see twigs are kind of reddish brown, and you'll see that the twigs are oppositely arranged on the stems. Let's see if I can show a better example. You can see these twigs here are opposite one another, so the twigs and the leaves are oppositely arranged. See here, each node is oppositely arranged, opposite one another on the stem. And then eventually the twigs graduate into slightly woodier branches, that are kind of brownish gray colored, and eventually with age you get a bit of a woody trunk with some slightly furrowed textures, as you can see down here. See, these shrubs get slightly furrowed or stringy bark with age. So now let's talk about a very important feature of this plant that attracts people to want to cultivate this in their gardens, and it's the blossoms of the Cleveland sage. Now, during the late spring through sometimes well into summer, sometimes as late as September, I've seen these. Usually May, June, July are the peak months for this plant to bloom. But if you look at here, these lavender flowers, absolutely beautiful, beautiful, typical lipped flowers, typical of the mint family, the Lamiaceae, and they too help perfume the air even more. So when this plant is not in bloom, you'll smell it. Believe me, the aroma will carry. But when it is in bloom, it carries all that much more. So these are late spring through midsummer is your typical blooming period for the Cleveland sage. Now I mentioned that the grayish green leaves and the purple flowers. Now there is one shrub that with which this plant can be confused, and that's a plant that's native more in northern Orange County northbound, which is the purple sage. If you refer to my purple sage spotlight video from 2021, you'll see that these plants do look very similar indeed. So how do you tell the difference between purple sage and the Cleveland sage? They have very similar colored flowers, very similar foliage. However, there are ways to tell whether the plant is in bloom or not, whether you're looking at Cleveland sage or purple sage, because I've seen purple sage naturalizing here in San Diego County. Sometimes you have to get up close. Now, my first clue would be the fragrance of the plant. Cleveland sage, again, has that really heavy perfume aroma, whereas purple sage has more of a spicy, pungent, biting, spicy aroma. Very slightly bitter, very spicy, that really hardcore sage smell. Whereas Cleveland sage has more of a perfumed aroma. That's one way. Now, second way is the leaves are slightly different. They are slightly different. But they're quite similar actually. They're quite similar. Sometimes purple sage will have some slight little lobes at the bottom of the leaves sometimes, but we're going to talk about the flowers and how they differ from purple sage. Purple sage and Cleveland sage have very similarly colored flowers. However, there's a difference in the way the flowers are arranged on the inflorescence, or the section where the flowers are. Now, Cleveland sage tends to focus its blooms more towards the top of the inflorescence. So a lot of times will be spread out, maybe a layer or two down from the top. And you can see here, most of these only go down maybe about 2, sometimes more. Whereas purple sage instead tends to have longer inflorescences with more whorls of flowers going down the stem. They're still pretty similar, but purple sage tends to have more of these flower whorls going down the stem, whereas Cleveland sage tends to be limited to a few at the very top. And the inflorescences on purple sages are longer and stick up way higher above the shrubs than the Cleveland sage. But if in doubt, the aroma of the plant should be the clue. The aroma of the plant should be the clue. Let's go ahead and get a few more pictures, and then we'll talk about a few other aspects of this plant before we wrap up this video. Alright, so a couple other things. Just like the other sages and a lot of the other plants in the mint family, the Lamiaceae, the fruits are basically these little nutlets, these little tiny nutlets that are contained in these spent flower heads. So inside you'll have little nutlet-like seeds. And so that's why a lot of times, long after the flowers are gone, you'll still see the seed heads for quite a while, well to the end of the year. Sorry about that. I was trying to see if I can get something to come out there. But yeah, living here in San Diego County, Cleveland sage is definitely a great plant. It is very drought tolerant, as you can tell. If this area didn't get any irrigation, these plants would look a little shabby right now because it'd be dry and we're not getting much rain, and that's normal. So your focus is mostly on the leaves when they leaf out in the winter rainy season, and when they flower in late spring and early summer. This is a very attractive plant. Butterflies, bees, and other pollinators love these sages. Hummingbirds as well. So this is a great plant for your garden, especially for a wildlife garden. It provides great habitat for smaller critters like wren-tit birds, lizards, and stuff like that. So great habitat, and it's a native plant. So once you get this plant established, once you first get it in the ground, you're definitely going to want to water it somewhat. You know, make sure you don't let it dry out too much because it's not established in the soil. If the roots get established, you could pretty much let it go on its own. But if you want to extend the flowering season longer, a little extra water during the summer won't hurt, as long as you're not soaking it. Otherwise the plants can potentially have root fungus and stuff like that. But there you go, the Cleveland sage. Awesome plant here in San Diego County's foothills, chaparral, and sage scrub. Great smell, gorgeous flowers, beautiful foliage, beautiful round pleasing form. This is it, Salvia clevelandii, Cleveland sage. I think that's going to wrap up my spotlight on shrubs video. Finally got a spotlight on this sage that I have been meaning to do for years. Hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. Check out Cleveland sage when you're hiking in the foothills of San Diego County. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next spotlight.